You know that thing where the whole family gets together and there's one seat that always feels a little colder than the rest? Not because nobody's sitting in it, because you are. You showed up. You brought the potato salad nobody asked you to bring, and inside of 10 minutes, somebody's already made a joke at your expense and everybody laughed a little too hard. That's the seat. I'm Franklin, and today we're getting into the psychology of the Black Gen X kid who got handed the black sheep role, how you got picked, why the picking stuck, and what that kid grew up to do with their whole adult life. Let me tell you what the black sheep grew up to become, because that's the part nobody clocks. You didn't become the mess the family said you were. A lot of y'all became the exact opposite, quietly high-functioning. Pay your own bills, handle your own business, don't ask nobody for nothing. You got a job, maybe two. You got a house, or you're working on one. You don't post about it, you don't call home to brag about it. Matter of fact, half your family doesn't even know what you do for a living. And somehow, you're still the one they whisper about at the cookout. That's the trace. That's where we start. Because the behavior you're doing right now, the hyper-independence, the I'll figure it out myself, the flinch when somebody offers to help, that didn't come out of nowhere. That got installed. And once you see how it got installed, you can decide what you want to do with it. That's the whole video. Now let's back it up. In systemic family theory, that's the school of thought that looks at families like a system instead of just a bunch of people. The black sheep has an actual technical name. They call it the identified patient. That's the family member the whole system unconsciously agrees to point at so nobody has to look at the real problem. The family's got dysfunction. Everybody's carrying a little of it, but it's easier to say the problem is Junior than to say the problem is how we all treat each other in this house. So Junior becomes the storage unit. All the family's mess gets projected onto one person, and everybody else gets to feel a little more normal by comparison. And here's the part that stings. According to writing on this in Psychology Today, the scapegoat system works best when there's only one victim. One. Which means the other siblings often join in on the condemnation because piling on the black sheep raises their own status in the house. Your brother wasn't being cruel for sport. Your sister wasn't hating you personally. They were reading the room the family built, and they figured out early that the safest seat was any seat that wasn't yours. Doesn't make it hurt less, but it explains why the sibling who used to whisper mean stuff to you at 8 years old can now, at 50, act like none of it ever happened. They didn't remember it as cruelty, they remembered it as survival. So how does one kid get picked? Because it's rarely random. In a lot of houses, it's the sensitive one, the one who asked why. The one who cried at things the family thought you weren't supposed to cry at. The one who noticed when mama was sad and asked her about it out loud, when everybody else knew the rule was you don't ask mama about that. In writing on black families and identity, therapists have pointed out that the child who registers as different, softer, more curious, more questioning, often gets identified early and, in the language some folks use, picked on by the family itself. Not out of hate, out of a survival framing that goes back generations. If the world outside is already hard on black kids, the thinking went, we better toughen this one up before the world does it worse. So the toughening happened inside the house, and the softest kid got the most of it. You feel me? The very thing that made you you, the sensitivity, the questioning, the why do we do it that way, that was the thing that made you a threat to the family's unspoken rules. And a family running on survival rules doesn't have a lot of patience for a kid asking questions about the rules. Now let's put some numbers on the table, because this audience checks the work. The CDC ran a huge analysis of adverse childhood experiences using BRFSS data from 2011 to 2020, and about 63.9% of U.S. adults reported at least one adverse childhood experience. 17.3% reported 4 or more. And that's the group researchers flag as being at the highest risk for long-term health problems. That's Americans overall. When you narrow down to black adults specifically, a 2025 study in ethnicity and health looking at nearly 15,000 non-Hispanic black adults found about 54% reported at least one ACE, 19% of black women and 15% of black men reported 4 or more. And when you look at black children specifically, an analysis from SHADAC using national data found about 63.7% of black children had experienced at least one ACE, the highest of any racial group and well above the 46.3% overall rate for kids. Now I want to be honest with you about what those numbers do and don't say. They don't say every black Gen X kid was scapegoated. They don't say your house was worse than everybody else's house. What they say is the pool of black kids who grew up with at least one hard thing happening in the home is big. It's a majority. So if you're sitting there right now feeling like your childhood had some rough edges nobody named, you're not making it up, and you're not alone in it. That's the piece. All right, so you got picked. You got the role. You carried it through the 80s and 90s. What did that do to the adult version of you? This is where it gets specific. There's research from Zagefka in 2021, published in the Family Journal, that found adults who were in the scapegoat role in their family of origin were more likely to experience depressive symptoms as grown folks. Another researcher, Guler in 2021, found scapegoated kids were more likely to experience abuse or neglect and, this part is heavy, more likely to describe themselves as problematic or a burden. Describe themselves that way, meaning the story the family told about them, they picked it up and started telling it about themselves. And there's a big meta-analysis from Humphreys and colleagues in 2020, published in JAMA Psychiatry, that pulled together a whole pile of studies on childhood emotional maltreatment. What they found, adults who went through it were about 2.3 times more likely to develop depression and 2.7 times more likely to develop an anxiety disorder. 2.7. That's not a small bump. That's a real, measurable, lifelong pull on your mental health, and it starts in the house you grew up in. Now let me be careful here. That research is on adults broadly, not specifically Black Gen X, but the mechanism doesn't care about your generation. If you got told you were the problem for 20 years, your nervous system remembers that whether you were born in 68 or 78. And Gen X in particular, according to reporting from Therapist.com looking at APA data, has this pattern of deferred emotional needs and a real stigma against therapy, especially for what some folks call little T trauma, the stuff that wasn't a headline event, but was a slow drip for 2 decades. That's your childhood, filed under, I turned out fine. Did you though? Let's talk about how you actually turned out. This is the behavior trace. Watch if any of this lands. You're hyper-independent. You'd rather do it yourself and be tired than ask somebody and be indebted. Somebody offers help. Your first instinct isn't gratitude, it's suspicion. What do they want? What's the catch? When's the receipt coming? Because in the house you grew up in, help came with a bill attached, and the bill was usually bigger than whatever the help was worth. So you learned early, don't take the loan, ever. Even from people who genuinely just want to give you a ride to the airport. You overachieve quietly, not out loud. You're not the one posting the promotion on Facebook. You're the one who got the promotion 2 years ago and never mentioned it because on some level, you already know how the family responds when you do well. It's not applause. It's a little jab dressed up as a joke. Oh, you too good to call now? Look at you, big shot. So you stop telling them. You stop telling anybody. You just do the thing and keep the thing to yourself and let people find out 3 years later by accident. You're the fixer for everybody but yourself. You'll spot somebody else's problem from a mile away and start solving it before they finish the sentence. But when something's going wrong in your own life, you sit on it, alone, in the dark, for months, because asking for help feels like handing somebody a weapon you know they'll eventually use. And your relationship with the family, right now, today, it's complicated. Maybe you still show up. Maybe you're the reliable one who makes the calls, sends the money, drives the distance. Maybe you cut it off completely. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle, where you're technically in touch, but you haven't had a real conversation in 10 years. That brings us to the estrangement piece, because the numbers here are actually pretty striking. There's survey data reported in the week showing that about 38% of Gen X have gone no contact with a family member. Compare that to 20% of boomers, 50% of millennials, and 60% of Gen Z. So Gen X sits in this interesting middle place. Higher than your parents' generation, but not as high as your kids' generation. You were the ones who started giving yourselves permission to walk away from family, but you didn't do it as freely as the ones who came after. And there's research from Carl Pillemer at Cornell that found about 27% of Americans over 18 are completely estranged from at least one close family member. That's more than 1 in 4 adults. That's not a rare thing. That's a common thing that people just don't talk about at work. Now here's where it gets specific to Black families. A 2023 U.S. study on estrangement, cited on the Family Estrangement Research Summaries, found that Black adults were about 1/4 less likely to be estranged from their mothers than white adults. but 3 times more likely to be estranged from their fathers. 3 times. And the typical age when the estrangement kicked in was the mid-20s, which tracks. That's when you moved out for real, got your own money, and finally had the physical distance to see the dynamic clearly for the first time. So if you're a black Gen X who's the black sheep and you've got a distant or non-existent relationship with your father and a complicated but still there relationship with your mother, you are, statistically, sitting right in the middle of a very common pattern. Not a personal failure, a pattern. Let me hit you with one more piece before we bring it home. There's a study in the Journal of Psychology from Vignando and Bazumic in 2023 that found higher perceived maternal grandiose narcissism predicted more scapegoating in the family, especially in houses where there was a golden child on the other side of the equation. So if your mama was the type where her image mattered more than most things, and one of your siblings could do no wrong while you could do no right, that dynamic is documented. It has a shape. It has research behind it. You weren't imagining the split. And that golden child, by the way, let me say something about them, because a lot of folks miss this. The golden child didn't win. They looked like they won when you were kids, but they got their own damage. They got told their worth was performance. Their love was conditional on delivery. Meanwhile, you got told you were the problem, which sounds worse, and in a lot of ways it is worse, but at least you knew where you stood. The golden child spends their adulthood terrified of dropping the crown. You spent yours already knowing there was no crown to drop. Different injuries, same house. Okay, so what do you do with all this? Because I know some of y'all are watching this like, all right, Franklin, you named the thing, now what? First, and this is the piece almost nobody says out loud, you don't have to fix the family to fix yourself. Those are 2 different jobs. The family system that gave you the role, that system's been running for decades, sometimes generations. There's research from a 2025 paper in Behavioral Sciences looking at black mother-daughter relationships across generations, and it laid out how discipline patterns, punitive versus logical versus natural consequences, get passed down mother to daughter to daughter. Meaning the way your mama raised you was shaped by how her mama raised her, and so on back. That's a lot of momentum. You are not going to walk into Thanksgiving dinner and reverse 100 years of family engineering with a nice speech. Let that go. What you can do is stop being the storage unit. Stop carrying the family's projections as if they're facts about you. When your cousin makes the little joke, you don't have to laugh and you don't have to fight. You can just let it sit there in the air, unanswered, and let the person who threw it feel the weight of it. That silence is a skill. Practice it. Second thing, you gotta learn to let help. Be help. Not a debt. Not a setup. Not the front end of a manipulation. Sometimes somebody just wants to hold the door. Your job is to walk through the door without checking it for wires. That takes practice too, because your nervous system has been on high alert since you were 7. Start small. Let somebody buy you lunch. Don't split the bill. Don't pay them back later. Just say thank you and eat. Third, the overachieving thing. Keep the excellence. That's yours. You built it. Nobody can take it. But separate it from the need to prove the family wrong. Because if you're still, at 50, doing everything you're doing so the people who counted you out at 10 will finally see it, you have handed them the steering wheel of your entire life. They're not going to see it. Even if they do, they're not going to say it. You are working for an audience that will never clap. Take that energy back and spend it on things you actually want. Fourth, if you've gone no contact or you're thinking about it, know that you're not alone in that, and it's not a moral failing. There's a growing pile of research showing family estrangement is common, it's often protective, and it doesn't always mean forever. Some folks come back to it later on new terms. Some don't. Both are legitimate. What matters is you're not carrying the whole story of that decision by yourself in your own head like you're the only one who ever did it. And fifth, this is the one I want you to sit with. The role of black sheep was assigned to you. It was not who you are. The family needed a container for the mess they couldn't own, and they picked you because you were the one most likely to survive it. That's a backhanded compliment, I know, but sit with it. They didn't pick the fragile one. They picked the one they knew, deep down, could carry it. Which means the same strength they exploited to make you the storage unit is the same strength that got you to your own house, your own job, your own life without them. That strength is real. It's yours. Don't give it back. The last thing I'll say is this. When you look back at the kid you were, the sensitive one, the one who asked why, the one who noticed too much, do not be embarrassed by that kid. That kid was right about most of it. The house was strange. The rules didn't make sense. The way certain people got treated compared to how you got treated wasn't fair. You weren't crazy. You weren't dramatic. You weren't too much. You were a small person telling the truth in a room full of adults who had agreed not to. And they punished you for it because the truth was inconvenient to the arrangement. Grown you gets to make a different arrangement. Starting today, if you want to. That's the whole point of naming any of this. Not to relitigate the past. To stop letting the past run the meeting. All right, that's what I got for you on this one. Go on and watch the one playing on the screen right now. Start there.